Tonight, on The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown, Bette Davis writes a letter to Daddy, makes Peggy scream, and lights up with Johnny. Roll the intro. Hello, boys and girls. This is your old friend RJ City, and I'm back with another episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown, where I take an actor, an entertainer, and I find one of their works that I like, one that I don't, and one that you maybe don't know that much about. And today, I am very excited. I am over the moon because we are talking about the wonderful, legendary, iconic Bette Davis, who, to me is like the quintessential actress. Oh, look, I got this. Hold on here. That's bothering me. That's better. Bette Davis is like what, to me, instantly the first person that comes to mind when I think of like a legendary actress or a Hollywood actress. She's one of the greatest of all time. I don't know who even comes close. Maybe there's an argument that she is the greatest of all time. That's just me. I don't know that many actresses. Perhaps a Meryl Streep would come close, but I would say certainly Bette has a tremendous body of work, and I'm excited to break it down. So without any further ado, let's get on to The Good. And The Good is a little film, okay, this is the thing. It's really hard to pick one good film of Bette Davis's. I feel like I would leave a lot out, and I'm frustrated. So I just want to make clear how many good and critically acclaimed movies she did. In 1935, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress in Dangerous. 1938, she did it again with Jezebel. Then she was nominated in 1939 for Dark Victory, 1940 for The Letter, 1941 for Little Foxes, 1942 for Now Voyager, great film, 1944 for Mr. Skeffington, 1950 for All About Eve, another classic film, 1952 for The Star, and finally, in 1962 for the movie we're going to talk about right now, and that, of course, is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Now, she is, you would think, past her prime at this point because she's known for certain roles, but this is like a departure into this older woman, crazed woman, and this wonderful psychodrama thriller kind of thing. It also stars Joan Crawford. Obviously, many people know Joan Crawford and Bette Davis did not get along. But it also stars, and I'd be remiss if I did not mention, the wonderful Victor Buono, who was in a share of terrible, terrible cheap horror films, and I can't wait to break those down. But he was also King Tut on the Batman 66 series. Let me just read the plot a little bit to give you the gist. Faded actress Blanche, and played by Joan Crawford, and baby Jane Hudson, played by Bette Davis, they lived together. Jane was by far the most famous when she performed with their father in vaudeville. But as they got older, it was Blanche who became the finer actress, which Jane still resents. Blanche is now confined to a wheelchair, or the shackles, if you will, and Jane is now fully in control. Time goes by, Jane exercises more and more control over her sister, intercepting her letters and ensuring that few, if anyone from the outside, has contact with her. As Jane slowly loses her mind, she torments her sister, going to ever greater extremes. The wonderful thing about this film is that it's a classic in the sense that it's not even groundbreaking or the style they use. It's just a great classic film. There's no special effects. Everything, it's not supernatural in that sense, but that makes it more horrifying, especially in black and white, and especially played like this. The screenplay is by Lucas Heller, and it's based on a novel, which I didn't realize, by Henry Farrell, called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And as we break these down, it is interesting to find out how many films are based on novels of the day, and I don't know if you see that much anymore to such acclaim. Bette Davis created her own makeup for the role of Baby Jane. If you've never seen the movie, if you've seen a picture of Baby Jane where she has that white face makeup on with the pretty little girl makeup, this is the movie I'm talking about, and you can appreciate how terrifying it is. Director Robert Aldrich said it closely matched his idea for the character's grotesque makeup, but he was afraid to suggest it because he didn't want to offend Bette Davis, who of course had a natural penchant for getting pissed off. Unlike most of her peers in Hollywood, though, Davis was unafraid to wear ugly costumes and makeup if they enhanced her performance. She wore unflattering makeup portraying a vain socialite in Mr. Skeffington, and donned severe makeup and partially shaved her head to play Queen Elizabeth I in The Virgin Queen. And this is another good thing about the movie. It's these two, Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. Of course, you know, there's some reality behind the tension, but they're two powerhouses, and they're really going at it, and the tension is palpable on screen for a reason. To incorporate their old acting career, since they both played actresses, footage from the Bette Davis films Parachute Jumper and Ex-Lady from 1933, and Joan Crawford's film Sadie McKee in 1934 was used to represent the acting of Jane and Blanche. This is interesting. Something else I found out. The character of Liza, who played Mrs. Bates' daughter, was played by Bette Davis's real-life daughter, B.D. Merrill. After Joan Crawford's daughter, Christina, wrote the best-selling tell-all book Mommy Dearest, which you could imagine was an unflattering portrayal of Joan Crawford, Merrill published a memoir, this is what I didn't know about, that also depicted her mother in an unfavorable light. And boy, I would like to crack that open. So, very famously, it's also chronicled in that TV series Feud. Joan Crawford and Bette Davis did not get along, and they continued to not get along for many, many years, despite the success of this film. And this tale that I'm going to tell you now of what happened after Baby Jane is going to sum it up perfectly. Crawford was scheduled to appear alongside Bette Davis on a publicity tour for Baby Jane, but canceled at the last minute. Davis claimed that Crawford backed out because she did not want to share the stage with her. In a 1972 telephone call, Crawford told author Sean Considine that after seeing the film, he urged Davis to go and have a look. When she failed to hear back from her co-star, Crawford called Davis and asked what she thought of the film. Davis replied, "You were so right, Joan. The picture is good, and I was terrific." Crawford said that was it. She never said anything about my performance, not a word. Considine alleges that this incident and Davis's refusal to acknowledge her co-star's contribution to the film led Crawford to cancel the publicity tour and upstage Davis at the Oscars. So they have this call, and Betty was like, "I was great, goodbye." And Crawford's like, "To hell with this, I'm going to get my revenge." And this is how she did it. Prior to the Oscar ceremony, of which Bette Davis was nominated for the final time, Crawford contacted the Best Actress nominees who were unable to attend the ceremonies and offered to accept the award on their behalf if they won, which is just weird, first of all. It's just weird behavior. You're not nominated, sit down. Bette Davis claimed that Crawford lobbied against her among Academy voters. So, you know, who's going to win? Is it going to be Betty? Well, Joan, except for Betty. It turned out Anne Bancroft won Best Actress for The Miracle Worker, another good film. But she was in New York performing a stage play. This is in the day when people are like, look, the Oscars are nice and all, thank you for the award, but like, I got work to do. Crawford came out and accepted the award on her behalf. Crawford triumphantly swept on stage to pick up the trophy. Davis later said, "It would have meant $1 million more to our film if I had won. Joan was thrilled. I hadn't." Dear Lord. As both... Oh, yes. Oh, Lord, my headband fell off. Can I put it back on? Is that okay with everyone? That's fine. Look at how nice. Davis and Crawford accepted lower salaries in exchange for a share of the film's profits. So they wanted a stake in it, but Joan Crawford was so petty towards Betty that it didn't happen. Also, I'd like to take this moment to clear up. It's not B-E-T-T-Y when we're talking about Bette Davis. It's B-E-T-T-E, just to clarify. Davis considered it foolish of Crawford to have worked against their common interests, especially at a time when roles of actresses of their age was scarce. It was a Titanic film. It was well received, and it spawned the succession of horror thriller films featuring psychotic older women, also known as the psycho-biddy subgenre. Among them, Robert Aldrich directed again Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, which tried to reunite Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. However, Bette Davis got Joan replaced during filming by Olivia de Havilland. The other similar films are Whatever Happened to Aunt Alice, and Whoever Slew Auntie Roo, and What's the Matter with Helen, and there was an Italian parody, which I need to see, called Whatever Happened to Baby Toto. So, that spawned whatever happened to Baby Jane spawned a lot of copycat films, especially in that day. Those films were all the rage, the psycho genre, that whole thing as it grew and got older. So because of that, there was a lot of bad copycat films, which is why my entry on the bad side is a 1973 TV horror movie called Scream Pretty Peggy, which is perhaps one of the worst titles I've ever heard. It's directed by Gordon Hessler, starred Bette Davis, Ted Bessel, and Cyan Barbara Allen. The plot follows, Cyan is a young college student who's given a job by a sculptor housekeeping at a mysterious mansion where his sister and their elderly mother, played by Bette Davis, reside. It was broadcast as the ABC suspense movie on November 24th, 1973. It was shot on location on the Noah Dietrich estate above the Sunset Strip. And let me read it. I think we can do this. It's fun. Peggy is a college student and aspiring artist who works as a housekeeper in the mansion of mysterious recluse Miss Elliot. That's Bette Davis' character, and her oddball sculptor son Jeffrey. Take a minute and just guess where we're going right now. She becomes suspicious when George Thornton comes to the house looking for his missing daughter, who once worked in the position she now holds. And even more so when she learns that Jeffrey's sister, whom she was led to believe was on an extended European vacation, is actually mentally deranged and living in the apartment above the garage. Undaunted by warnings from her employer, Peggy is determined to befriend the girl, a decision that leads to a lot of mysterious doings and a Psycho-inspired climax. Basically, the entire plot of this movie is just like Psycho. Okay? Same twist, and how they play it off like a twist when everyone expects it because it's way after Psycho came out is beyond me. It's also weird to see this version of Bette Davis still being creepy, but also in color, because we're 1973 now. It's just very odd. There's something about her acting and that horror genre that lends itself better to the black and white. However, she's not the creepiest person in this movie. She's just a weird old lady, and it's like, that's it. It's like, okay. And sometimes at this point, like, someone's star is so big that they'll really just slap their name out front and they won't be in the movie that much at all. I mean, she was in it a decent amount, but certainly not enough to say she carried the film. However, I think it's one of the worst of her movies. Look, it's a TV movie, and even then it isn't very good. It's Psycho for cheap. So if that's your bag, if you want another Psycho without the quality acting and inventive plot, this perhaps is the movie for you. So the good is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. The bad is Scream Pretty Peggy, which is still one of the worst movie titles I've ever heard. And the unknown is something a little bit of a left turn, because it is all of Bette Davis's appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. According to my research, she made about 6 or 7 appearances in the 80s. She had made appearances before that, but I want to speak about this particular era. Also before that, she made a nice appearance on Dick Cavett, but it was a long episode about her entire career, which is nice to check out. And after these, she would appear on Letterman, even though she was much, much older at this point. Although she's very old on the Carson Tonight Show. Nevertheless, she is a star, and she comes out in these mini skirts and these brooches and these wonderful hats and gloves and necklaces. And she's smoking constantly. There's not one frame in any of these interviews where she does not have a lit cigarette in her hand. Allegedly, she smoked 100 cigarettes a day, every day. And at some point it shows. There are even points where, she would come out, do a thing, and then another guest would come out and they would move it down the couch and they would focus on that second guest, and you would see the tight shot of the guest and you just say, poof, you would see this smoke just puff into frame. I think it was a way of, it was an actor's trick of keeping her present. She also, one of the appearances on The Tonight Show was actually guest hosted by Joan Rivers. Johnny Carson was not there, which is very interesting because it was right before Joan Rivers left to do the Joan Rivers show, and she ended up, of course, having a famous beef with Johnny. Johnny cut her out. There are 2 appearances in particular I love very, very much. One is in 1983. She's on the show with Richard Pryor, who is there promoting The Toy, another movie we need to break down, and his cameo in Superman 3. I think he was just in that movie so I could send him out. Pryor is in love with her and says very sweet things about her off the top. Also, Pryor says to Johnny, last time I was supposed to be on the show, I got sick and I had to cancel. Thank you for telling people that I wasn't here because I was sick. And they start getting into this talk about some guests will just no-show at the last minute and not even call. And Bette Davis said, really? Some guests do that? Charming! And it's very obvious that they're alluding to someone. Who knows who they're talking about? It's not really clear. However, according to a reliable source of mine, Bette is actually a last-minute replacement on that episode for Barbra Streisand, who allegedly canceled and didn't even call. So that is a nice blow-it-out-your-ass to Barbra Streisand. And it's very nice to watch with that knowledge. The other appearance of hers that I love is her 1988 appearance. Martin Short is also on the show. He sits next to her, and he does a lot of Jerry Lewis impressions. Johnny loves the Jerry Lewis, and the punchline is he'll keep turning around and go, Bette! And she is just so stone-faced constantly, and it's amazing. And then he ends up doing Bette. Bette says to him, do you do me? And he replies, well, you're not that easy to do. And then she said, then skip it. So it's nice to see, even at that age, she was incredibly sharp and incredibly witty. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention my absolute favorite part. It's still in this episode. She also destroys Faye Dunaway. Johnny asks her who's the worst person she's ever worked with in Hollywood, and it takes her no time to respond, and she stands by her opinion as one of the worst people in Hollywood, and that a million other people would tell you the same. So if you're into some good fashion trashing of various actresses and singers and smoking, these Bette Davis appearances on The Tonight Show are for you. So the good was Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, the bad was Scream Pretty Peggy, and the unknown were her appearances on The Tonight Show. And of course I'm talking about the woman who had those eyes, Bette Davis. I am RJ City, and this is what I've chosen to do with my life.
Guests of the RJ City Show, subscribe to his channel, follow him on social media, and buy his t-shirts at prowrestlingtees.com/RJ City.